I'm Taryn, and I am an employee in the Pioneer Library System. I'm going to be one of the moderators tonight. And we have two other moderators, Dave and Samuel will both be moderating. They both also work for Pioneer. And I want to emphasize that this program will be recorded. And so we would like you to turn off your video. We're going to probably, I think, already have muted you. So we're going to make sure that videos are off and muting everybody. So please feel free to use the chat feature as we go along with this program. So if you have any questions or anything like that, go ahead and use the chat function. And now we'll just go ahead and begin. So whether you are new to podcasting or a veteran, we hope each of you takes away something valuable tonight, and perhaps we will see a few more podcasts pop up in the world from this exciting program. And so in order to keep this program on track, we are aiming for about an hour total. We will have slides to go through, and these slides are going to just guide our program. And they're going to have pre-made and themed questions on each one. And so towards the end of the program, we're going to try our best to make time for our attendees to be able to ask questions as well. If you think of them and you're just like, I'm going to forget if I don't type it right now, feel free to do that in the chat, and we can kind of go back to that during the question time. All right, so to officially get started, we're going to introduce our panelists. And when I say your name, feel free, I'd love for you to just unmute and say hi. So first we have Kayla Branch, and she is, her podcast is From the Newsroom, the Oklahoman.
Hey everybody, glad to be here. I'm a reporter at the Oklahoman, and we have a weekly podcast. We wrap up the big news of the week with reporters in our newsroom who have written about several different topics. So glad to be here and to talk with you all.
Thanks, Kayla. And next up, we have Ben Felder with Listen Frontier podcast.
Hello, my name is Ben Felder. I'm a reporter at the Frontier, a nonprofit investigative outlet here in Oklahoma. We have an office in Tulsa. I'm based in Oklahoma City, and host of our weekly podcast, Listen Frontier. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks, Ben. Next up, we have Zach Logsden, which he is from a podcast that takes place in my city called I Am Norman.
Hi, I'm Zach Logsden. I host I Am Norman, as she indicated. It was a podcast I started at the beginning of the pandemic with the goal of just telling stories about the people of Norman, organizations, philanthropies, just highlighting different things that make Norman great.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. All right, next up, we have a Pioneer Library System employee who also has her own true crime podcast, and her name is Courtney Shelley.
Hi, yes, I am Courtney. I host a podcast called All We Know. I am actually a co-host, so I do have a partner that works with me, and I'm a children's librarian who is interested in murdery stuff. So people are always a little bit surprised when they find that out, but I'm excited to chat with you guys today about starting a podcast, and hopefully we can inspire some people to start their own podcasts.
Awesome. Thanks, Courtney. All right. And next up, we have John Post, who likes to go by JP, and he is with the Masters of Divinity podcast.
Hi, everybody. I'm JP. I am one of 3 co-hosts of the Masters of Divinity podcast, like Taryn said. It's a podcast that is an intersection between theology and pop culture.
Awesome. Thank you. And then last, we have Matthew, who actually is a PLS employee and works at Norman East with me. And he has just a ton of different experience in podcasting. So no particular one that he's associated or runs himself right now, but he has a good wealth of information. So we're excited to have him be a panelist as well.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Matthew. I work at Pioneer Library System, but I also produce some radio at KOSU and produce a podcast over there too. KOSU is a local NPR affiliate from Oklahoma State University, but we have an office up in OKC, and that's kind of where I used to spend most of my time, or a lot of my time before all this. But
thanks, Matthew. All right. So again, thank you guys. Thank you so much, panelists, for taking time tonight to be part of this program, share your expertise about podcasting. We're all really excited to learn from you. And so we're going to start asking our questions. And when we do, any panelist is welcome to insert your comment and answer. And so let's move on to our first question. And Samuel is going to start that.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So the first question is kind of the big one. Why start a podcast? And maybe dive into what motivated you, but also, why should, just the everyday person start a podcast?
I'll go. Why did I start a podcast? I had a lot of time on my hands. I work in sports marketing. I do a sports marketing podcast as well. And when sports shut down back in March, I had some, like I said, I had some time on my hands, and I just saw, I felt like everybody in Norman, all my peers, my neighbors, we felt so far apart, and I thought this could be something that brought everybody together a little bit, made us feel less alone. And it's not overly difficult. If you have a voice and a computer, you can pretty much start a podcast. So if you follow Norman politics at all, I don't think I was successful in bringing Norman together, as Norman appears to be more divided now than it's ever been. But that was the goal, and that's why I started it.
I think off what Zach said. Oh, sorry, Ben.
Courtney, go ahead. Courtney, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a little bit of the naivete of starting a podcast is you thinking that you have something to say, right? You think you have a unique perspective, or you have a creative outlet that you want to plug into in the world. And so it's a kind of for me, it was really selfish. I just thought, I'm really into true crime. I have a friend who's also into true crime. So why not do this fun thing where we get to hang out and talk about the things that interest us, and we can do it in a way differently than other people are doing it right now. So that was kind of the start. But what were you going to say, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, for us personally, I think our reason, like a lot of other publications, is just trying to diversify our publishing platforms, getting into video and audio space. But I think one of the cool things about podcasts right now is, in the hyper competitive world that is journalism or content production, podcasts allow you to be niche, and niche can be really key if you want to be successful. I think over the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen the publishing industry really decline, whether we're talking about newspapers or even online publishing. Magazines have been somewhat successful, and one of the reasons why is because many are niche publications. So you're reaching maybe a smaller audience, but a more enthused audience. And so I think podcasts allow you to do that and reach niche audiences, maybe even a little better than like blogs would. So like Courtney's, true crime podcast, I think that's a perfect example of, you're tailoring it to a specific audience. If you're local in a town like Norman, I mean, Norman's not small, but maybe a smaller community or even like a small town. I think podcasts allow you to be niche, and niche can be really key when you're trying to, grow an audience. And, 200 listeners on a podcast is very impressive depending on what the podcast is. But if you were to start a blog and you got 200 readers, I mean, that may also be impressive depending on what you're doing. But I think the impact per user can be greater with a podcast as well.
Yeah, and I'll second Ben. Coming from like a news publication platform, for us, it was just trying to find another avenue to get our coverage out to folks. But at the same time, I feel like there are also some stories that are best told, and just some ideas that are best executed when they're done with audio. I mean, when you can be fully immersed in, the sounds of whatever story, whatever conversation is taking place. And so that is definitely one reason to think about starting a podcast, but also just, it's fun. I enjoy podcasting. It's a good time. I mean, if you're here, a part of this panel, you probably think that you'd enjoy it too. And that's a pretty good reason to try something.
And yeah, just to kind of add to what a lot has been said, considering a niche audience and whatnot. I don't know how much more niche you can get than an intersection between theology and pop culture. So as somebody who has like a very small following and a very small audience, it really is at the end of the day because it's fun. It's I always kind of liken it to like starting a garage band or writing a zine. You do it because you're kind of flexing whatever talents you have. And me and my friends, we have certain talents that we like to flex, and sometimes it's just for each other, and it's a fun thing we do.
Awesome, thank you. Any other feedback on that question from our panelists? And as we're going, if the audience, if you think of any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dave for our next question about the sort of the tech side of things.
Hey everyone. So this is the next part. You've decided you want to start a podcast. So how do you do it? Do you want to do it live? Do you want to record it? So for y'all, the folks we have here who do podcasts on a regular basis, how do you do what you do? What recording software do you use? Do you do a lot of editing? What suggestions do you have for people as far as the mechanics of starting a show? And so on.
Yeah, well, I'll go. So we actually record in a studio, but it's a shared studio. So I think if you are willing to spend a little money, and it doesn't have to be a lot, you could probably find some kind of co-working space or a shared studio space like we do. But if you aren't able to make that commitment, I think we use in the field reporting Zoom mics. I think a lot of people do that. You can even do it just over Skype and Zoom and record the audio. It's not going to be quite as good as it would be maybe with a Zoom mic or higher grade equipment. But I mean, what we're doing right now sounds pretty good. And you could even make it as simple as that. We also keep it simple in editing. We use GarageBand. There's a lot of different editing software out there that you can use. It came on the Mac. That's how I learned. So that's what we do. And then for distribution, Captivate is a site that we use. There are a lot of other ones like it, but I really like it because it's really cheap. And it handles all your distribution for you, so you don't have to go to every podcasting platform to apply to be a part of their distribution platform, which can be really important. So this is just some of the companies and name brands that we use.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's getting distribution on as many platforms as possible is super important, but if whatever platform you're using to host, if it doesn't automatically do that for you, you have a lot of extra legwork. I know I've actually done it. So what else? Who else has some ideas about what your setup is and what suggestions you have? Okay.
So this is something I actually think about a lot because we're kind of very far down the ladder. I think my best tip I can give to beginners is to probably the best investment you're going to make is in a microphone, especially if it's like a USB mic, like if you can get like a Blue Yeti or a Samsung Go mic, which is what I'm using right now and I use for my podcast. That's pretty good. But eventually down the line, you probably want to get like a more professional microphone and look into that. As far as recording, we record over Skype using a program called Call Recorder by Ecamm. It's like $30, and it's actually a really good program, all things considered. So that's pretty much all the 2 cents I want to give on that. That's where my expertise ends.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I keep interrupting everybody. I was just going to say, I second what JP just said. I have a Yeti Blue microphone, which I think runs about like $120 to $150 on Amazon. And I keep looking at it sitting right over there on my desk right now. But I also have like a spit cover is what they call it. So that was something that in the early days, I was trying to get as close as I could to my microphone, but I was also breathing into my microphone, which you could hear. It picks up, it's that good that it picks up your breathing patterns too. So little things like that can better the quality of your audio. Because I think one of the worst, I mean, for me personally, I listen to a lot of podcasts. If somebody has bad audio, I'm not going to keep listening to the podcast. It is so distracting to me that I cannot, no matter if it's a topic that I'm interested in, I can't tolerate that. So we use a free program called Audacity to edit our podcast audio content. And what my partner and I do is we actually FaceTime, and we have headphones in so that we each record separately and then we overlay the audio. So what I do is we do it either way. We share editing responsibilities. So, and our Audacity program records our singular audio files, and then we overlay them, and then we do our intro and our outro music and all of that, add all that in. One of the things that we knew we weren't going to be able to do was to create our own RSS feed, which is how all of those podcast episodes get out to those different platforms. And unless you have somebody who can build one for you, then you kind of have to pay for a service like the one JP mentioned. We also we use Buzzsprout. That was something that we really liked, their leveled membership options. So if you're only going to put out like a couple episodes a month, you might want to pay less, and your hosting would cost you less under those circumstances. But if you're putting out a ton of content and you want that to be backed up somewhere, it also serves as a backup for you. So they remain kind of in the cloud, even if you're not continuing to put out episodes at some point. So if you're taking a break or something like that. But yeah, there's a million ways that you can record and edit your podcasting. But I think you don't have to spend a ton of money to do it. Don't think that you have to buy a huge, you don't have to soundproof a room. I record in this room that I'm in right now, and I close the door and it's fine. So as long as you can get somewhere that the audio is decent and that your equipment is okay, I think you're, starting off well.
I was going to throw in there about distribution. Simplecast is what I use. I don't even remember. I think it's $15 a month and unlimited episodes. I have not used any others, so I can't speak to whether or not Simplecast is better, but I can say that the analytics is probably what I love most about Simplecast, telling me very, very specific data on who's listening, where they're listening, and that's useful, for me. As far as recording, I agree 100% with Courtney that bad audio is not fun to listen to. At the same time, while I record my intro with a Blue Yeti using GarageBand, all of my interviews, I mean, it's just an interview podcast, I have a headset with I think it's a Logitech cheap headset, and I use a piece of software called Bria that it's phone call recording, give people a conference line to call into. And I do feel like on interview style podcasts, people are pretty forgiving about the audio quality because they understand, it's phone calls. They understand we're in a pandemic. They understand you not always have a studio to invite people into. So, honestly, the other podcast I do, the sports marketing podcast, I have no intro, I have no outro, I have no music. It is 100%. I get on the phone and record a conversation, and I have way more listeners on that one than I do my I Am Norman podcast. So well, again, while I agree with Courtney, I think if your content is good, then people can be pretty forgiving. And your guests, I guess, your guests are good and have something valuable to say. People can be pretty forgiving. And so I wouldn't want anyone to let technology or a lack of money stand in their way of doing a podcast, because I think you can make a good one, a great one, without investing a lot of money in it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I second that. And for everything that everyone said, we are using some version of that editing software. I've used some version of that editing software before. And a lot of times, we'll throw in audio from an interview that we've done out in the field. And I just use my phone, my voice memos app. And that has sufficed really, as long as there's no loud noises in the background, like you're in a quiet space, there's no music. Once I tried to do an interview at outside of a fast food restaurant, you could hear the songs playing over, we're having this deep conversation and there's Katy Perry in the background, like softly, that didn't bode too well. But you can really do it any way you want, like everyone has said.
Yeah, excellent points, everybody. And that's one thing I think that is really key if you're interested in doing a podcast. Don't worry more about your content and how captivating you are. You need to do something that you're interested in, because in order to be interesting, you need to be interested. So yeah, it's something like a free software like Audacity is great for editing. The few podcasts I do, I literally use this headset that I'm wearing right now. And I have a laptop and I record it all on Audacity. So yeah, don't worry about breaking the bank and getting a bunch of equipment. But I will also third on that, the Blue Yeti mic is quite good. My son uses that for his YouTube channel. So.
I guess since I work at a radio station, our gear is a lot more higher quality than probably what most people would want to pay for like a digital recorder and stuff like that. But seeing as how most of the interviews right now are being remotely recorded, we've been doing this thing called tape syncing, which is just basically what Courtney's has been doing. And I think like kind of what Kayla has been doing, where you just have the other person on the other end, if you're talking to them over the phone, record their own voice separately, and then you'll just sync it up later. So it kind of just removes like the call processing and like even stuff like Skype and Zoom, which is probably the best recording that you could get through like a call. There's still like this kind of weird processing that they do just to like, strip random sounds and stuff. But the thing that I always mention to people who are on the other end and recording themselves is you'll want to just like, do a hang loose sign with your hand, and from your pinky to your thumb, that's about how far you want your microphone to be if it's not like already a headset. Yeah. And doing that with just your phone, like phone microphones, like just pure into voice memos are like really awesome, and they're pretty great. You just have to do a little bit of finagling with certain things, but oh, and I also edit in Adobe Audition, which I think everyone here in Oklahoma, like the radio stations, that's kind of the standard. Though if you go outside of the state, I think more Pro Tools is like the professional standard for radio.
Excellent. See, I love how Matthew gets to come in here and show us all up because he's ultra professional. Good work, sir.
I will say too, and this might just be my librarian coming out, but I know that both Norman Central and OU libraries have like professional grade podcast studios that you can use for free. So if you don't want to purchase equipment yet, or if you're considering an idea and you want to see how it kind of pans out before you invest your own money, there are lots of options. I mean, libraries are great in all ways, but I don't know how COVID is affecting those things. I don't think Pioneer is allowing people to use that space currently, but I would definitely look into those options if you're thinking of pulling the trigger and that's the thing that's kind of stopping you from being able to do it.
Mm.
One more quick tip, I guess to give people comfort that have never done it. I had never edited audio in my life prior to doing this, and I opened GarageBand, and if I didn't know how to do something, which was everything to start, I got on YouTube or Google and typed in how do I, and within seconds I had multiple results on how to do it, and it's ridiculously easy. So again, don't let that scare anybody away.
Agreed. I did the same thing with Audacity. That's how I learned. YouTube is your friend.
I honestly think that over editing is more egregious than under editing.
Or any other tech ideas that you think we haven't touched on? Yes, JP.
I do just want to make one just like very small bonus tip. I do not recommend SoundCloud as a platform. We're on SoundCloud and we've been on it since 2016, and I think we did it because of the novelty of telling people we have a SoundCloud. But it's just not very good. It's mostly for music. I know a lot of podcasters want to use it, but it's mostly it's better for people who produce music than podcasts. You can't monetize a podcast. You can't. The advertising is very difficult. They're kind of riddled with bots. So I would recommend something like a Libsyn or Podbean for your podcasting host.
So yeah, so avoid SoundCloud unless you're trying to be a rapper.
Awesome. Any other quick thoughts on tech, or should we move on to prep? Okay, so I know this is going to vary, widely considering the kind of podcast you're doing, from an interview to sort of, a true crime podcast and whatnot. So if y'all could speak to the unique ways you have to prepare for your particular podcast episodes, the sort of the kind of prep you do, the research you do, what kind of notes or script you might work off of, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. So again, the type of podcast that we have is weekly, and we are bringing in reporters to talk in more depth about the biggest stories that they've been writing about. So our prep, we have to read their story or stories, multiple, if it's a topic that they've been covering. And then me and my co-host will get into a Google Doc and we will brainstorm like 3 or 4 kind of bigger picture questions that we want to make sure that we touch on. Especially with it being a lot of news stories, there are facts and details that we definitely want to include. And so we'll write those up. We do have an intro that we write every week. So we have all of that prepped and ready to go before we do the podcast. But I'm also a big fan of working off of what people are saying while we're interviewing them. And so having those follow-up questions, interview style, that are just kind of off the cuff as needed, I think make for really good conversation in addition to having that prep work. But like you just said, there really, it just depends on the type of podcast you're doing. I think Courtney's doing a true crime podcast, and I've done one of those before, and I wrote the entire script and I read that word for word after like 6 months of research and interviews that had been pre-recorded and that we put in together. It was very highly produced, and that had a lot more prep work. But it just kind of depends, and it depends on your personality. If you feel comfortable jumping into a conversation and just going off the cuff and working like that, then that can be good for you too. But that's kind of how we do that.
So I think kind of going off what we've already said, the format of your podcast really dictates a lot to do with this. So my podcast is formatted where I'm a co-host, so I have, dual hosting responsibilities with somebody else. But that means the way we set it up was that we would take turns hosting the episodes. So we rotate based on the week who hosts what episode. And that kind of came out of practicality, because I don't do this for a job. I do this for fun. My podcast isn't monetized, and we don't always have hours and hours every week to dive into research for a case or a situation that we're going to talk about. And so my preparation would vary based on what the case was, how responsible am I for the case. We've done different formats of episodes, and that kind of varies your level of preparation there. But I've done as much as reading a whole book about a case and doing as much research as possible to reading a Wikipedia article and riffing off of that. And so life kind of gets in the way sometimes, and you don't always have a ton of time to prepare, which I'm sure all of the journalists on this panel are cringing that I just said Wikipedia, but I love Wikipedia. So, I think you do what you can, and I know people are very formulaic and they want to put out the episodes every week, but if that's too much for you, if you can't prepare for that, then maybe you reconsider what your schedule, your formatting is, so that you can still give good content, you know, on a regular basis to your listeners.
Just jump in real quick and just say, as a podcast listener and not as a podcaster, I really do like the podcasts that don't come out every week, because if I fall behind, it doesn't feel overwhelming to catch up. But anyway, sorry to take us off track there.
I guess I'll hop in. So my show is a lot more interviewee, so it's pulling a lot from like, or the expectations for radio are like fresh air and things like that. So, but I think no matter what kind of like format you're in, I remember reading something that Ira Glass said, that radio, which kind of extends into podcasting, is like a didactic medium, which just means that it lends itself well to just like teaching or like storytelling. So you just want to like, whether it's like interview questions or just like telling like how your week went, you just want to like hit certain beats and like make sure it's a little bit structured. You don't want to go completely like random, but yeah, just maybe plan out like, what am I going to talk about? And then, you know, it shouldn't be too stressful for you. If it becomes stressful, then I think you should reevaluate, or, you know.
Yeah, good advice from everybody. The only thing I would add is that I think with the interviews, prepare. I mean, I type out questions a lot, especially the types of people I interview. A lot of preparation goes into interviewing someone. So especially if you feel like it's a high profile interview, whatever that looks like in your community or your topic, just think it goes along to research questions you want to ask, type them up, be prepared with possible follow-up questions. Preparation can be a real make or break for an interview.
I would take it a step further and say that not only do I prepare a list of questions, I actually give those questions to the participant ahead of time. A lot of the people I interview are not seasoned veterans for interviews, and they are a lot more comfortable and forthcoming and candid if they have time to think about their answers ahead of time. Now, I will say that 9 times out of 10, if not more, that's just an outline. And I think of follow-ups, and we get in a kind of, you know, a rhythm and comfort level, and usually go off that list quite a bit. But I feel like I find that it makes them more comfortable at the outset and more willing to go off topic or off our list if they kind of know what's coming. They're also, I mean, people are scared that you're going to ask them something that they don't want to answer or don't know how to answer. So if you kind of prepare them a little bit, kind of helps.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add, my podcast is mostly conversational and kind of relaxed. It's made up of, you know, 3 best friends who've been talking to each other for years anyway. So I know how to talk to them. I know what questions to ask them. I know how to make them entertaining. But usually it just kind of involves Wikipedia research and maybe a couple of articles here and there. And that's for like a typical episode. Sometimes we have episodes, and this might, I don't know, people might be turned off by this idea, but sometimes we just have episodes where we don't plan anything and we just riff for like an hour and 15 minutes. And this is going to sound so pretentious, but like I kind of compare it to jazz a little bit, where it's like, you know, what kind of ideas can come out of this? Is it going to be insane? Is it going to be boring? It's not really boring if you ask me. It's actually, but it is insane sometimes. But sometimes we just do it for the fun of it. And sometimes it gets some good responses, but at the same time, I think you have to be like a really good conversationalist, and you have to really know your co-host for something like that. Like you have to have a maybe either a long-lasting relationship, or you have to know them really well. And yeah, and I will second guess, be as prepared as possible, like wall to wall research, have the whole thing structured from end to end, because guests don't usually like to go that long. And so if you can kind of plan out, a limited time, that definitely puts them at ease.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for all the wonderful feedback and insight on that. So I guess I'll toss it back over to Dave unless anyone has anything else to say, and we'll move into the different advice and whatnot. And I'll let Dave take it from here.
If I can unmute my microphone, that's number one. So we've got to learn a little bit to research beforehand and talking a little bit about interviewing. But then there's also the topic of marketing and kind of these two basic questions. What do you think is the hardest part about doing a podcast? And what do you think is the best part about doing a podcast?
Hardest part for me is finding the time. I have a 40 to 50 hour a week at least job, and trying to coordinate schedules with other people is very difficult. Then coming up with a list of questions is, I usually spend at least an hour. So you got an hour to record it, an hour to prepare for it, an hour to edit it. And then you got to market it. And so it's time intensive, especially getting it started and getting an audience, getting people to subscribe. The best part for me is the feedback. I'll be honest, when it was easy for the first 4 months because I was at home and I didn't have much going on at work, and then work started back up, and then as I mentioned earlier, politics in Norman were annoying and frustrating, and that made me not want to do it anymore. And then the pretty much the day I decided, I think I said something to my wife like, I'm done. I can't anymore. I got a postcard in the mail from somebody I'd never heard of, never met, don't know this person at all, that said, I've lived in Norman my whole life, and I've learned more about this town in the past 6 months than I ever knew. Thank you so much for doing this. And then I think it took that amount of time for people really to catch on, and I started getting so much feedback and positive feedback and people thanking me for doing this. And so then it was like, okay, well, I guess I got to keep going. I can't stop now. And that feels good to know that people are listening and get value out of it. So that's for me, there's no point in doing it if people aren't enjoying it. And really there's no point in doing it if you don't know if people are enjoying it. So that vocal feedback is by far the best part for me.
But hold up, you're telling me that adulting and politics are exhausting? These are just shocking revelations.
Yeah. Especially in the time we're living in now. It's just,
yeah. That I can understand. Having done some political podcasts before, it is soul sucking. So it can hurt after a while. What else? Who else has some ideas?
I think we're riffing off each other a lot here, which is good. But I think the hardest part of podcasting for me was like kind of the opposite of what Zach is saying. You open yourself up to scrutiny from other people. So reviewers are sometimes really mean. I mean, like harsh, mean, and you cannot take those reviews off. You can't. It's not like your Facebook wall. You can't delete somebody's comment because you don't like it. You know what I mean? And we've had some not so nice reviews of the podcast, but one thing that my partner told me in the very beginning was, but that's a good thing because that means we're reaching out of our own bubble. You know what I mean? It's not just our friends and our family and people we know that are listening to the podcast. And even some of the best podcasts out there that get millions of downloads a week have negative reviews. And you're not going to be liked by everyone. You're not going to be everyone's, cup of tea or whatever you want to say. So that was a hard thing for me to do. And so eventually I kind of just stopped looking at the reviews because it was harder for me to not take them personally. Maybe I'm a softie, I don't know. But I think the best part is it, especially if you are kind of like a human-centered podcast where you're talking to your friends or you're getting to know people, that you really do learn a lot from other people. And even if you have, like, JP is on with his friends and I'm on with a friend of mine as my co-host, and there's things that you learn about yourself and about your hosts in these situations you talk about that you might not have been open to talking about under other circumstances. And so I think it is kind of human connection in a very pure form. And even if you think you're going to sound stupid, I have re-listened to podcasts where I thought I bumbled through the whole thing and you sound perfectly fine. So don't be worried about that. You get over the sound of your own voice. That's one thing a lot of podcasters tell me, is they don't like to hear their own voice, and you just get used to it. I mean, that's just part of the whole situation. And I think, there's a lot of things you can do for marketing. I mean, you can literally hire a company to do marketing for you. If you're that into it, you can monetize your podcast if you want to make money doing it. You really, like Zach said, like, the hardest part of all of this is you have to do the work. You can't put it on somebody else. You have to put the time in, you have to invest, you have to be on social media, you have to be marketing yourself so that you're continuing to garner listeners. And that's exhausting, especially with life right now going on. So consider how much time you need to invest for it to be successful for you. Not necessarily do you have to be the most popular podcaster showing up on some chart, but what does success look like for you, for your podcast?
Yeah, I think the best. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, just to kind of like touch on marketing, I definitely put that down as one of the two hardest things of podcasting, because I think it's, for a beginner, I think it should be really, you should understand that marketing is like a learned skill. Like, it's not something you can just throw yourself into. If you have like no training in marketing or even like a little media training, it's really difficult to get eyes on your project that isn't like your mom or college friends. And if you're podcasting, the competition is like already kind of rough, right? Like it's only gotten like more popular. So you're not just competing with like little guys like me, but you're also competing with like Conan O'Brien and Michelle Obama, right? So marketing is like, I once like just kind of threw myself into the marketing of our podcast, where I just like posted stuff every single day, like twice a day on our Instagram. And I was just feeling like total burnout, but our numbers are going up. But when I kind of pulled back on it and just kind of relaxed it, those numbers started going down. So it's like, you can do like the best marketing in the world, but at the end of the day, if the podcast isn't good, like they're not gonna stick around. So marketing is a really tricky thing. And it's, like I said, it's a learned skill. It's not something you can just do. And the other hard thing for me is just the momentum. Because, we're not like broadcast television, we don't have, or network television, we don't have seasons. It's kind of, our show kind of is like into perpetuity. We do it weekly. And so it's really important to come up with like a dedicated deadline for when your show goes online, and to stick to that deadline. And you have to stick to that because you kind of have to like try to get into the rhythm of your audience's lives and kind of become a part of their routine. And that's difficult for me because my podcast is made up of like me and two other co-hosts. I'm here in Oklahoma, and I have one co-host in Florida and another co-host in Hawaii. And they both have full-time jobs and families, and I work full-time here. So that the fact that we're able to get like a consistent show like every week is a miracle in itself. And to put out a good show is even more so, because those things do have to kind of come together. So that's just my take on that. But the best part, I think, is, I'm a big believer in something Joseph Campbell said, which is kind of cliche, which is to follow your bliss. Because if you follow it, it can like lead you to really cool things. And the more we kind of dig into this, it kind of takes us to interesting places. Like we were able to interview, like in our 12th episode, we were able to interview Rob Bell, who's like this kind of controversial Christian author, but who was also very influential to me and my friends. and we got to have a conversation with another very popular podcast called Good Christian Fun, which is sort of in the same genre as us. And that was humbling because they're much bigger and they're like much more, they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for years. And so when they're out podcasting you on your own podcast, it's very humbling and like a real learning experience. And also, I'm just a creative person. And if I didn't have an audience to show off my skills and kind of workshop my creativity, I would probably die. And at the end of the day, it's just something I get to do fun. It's creative with my two friends who live very far away and I never get to see anymore.
We automatically get bonus points for mentioning Joseph Campbell. So excellent work there. Ben, I think you were going to jump in a moment ago.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the best things about podcasts, and maybe this is specific for a news-oriented show like ours, and maybe like Kayla, but maybe I think for other topics as well, is you have incredible opportunity to take advantage of quick changes in the news. And so what I mean by that is, like, for example, when COVID arrived in Oklahoma, we launched a daily COVID podcast. It's kind of ambitious, but at the same time, not incredibly too hard. And we did it every day for a month. And, what it allowed us to do is myself and my colleague, Cassie McClung, who's in Tulsa and is kind of our lead healthcare reporter, is it gave us a chance at the end of the day to kind of, one, recap what we knew, but also talk about what we didn't know. And I think in conversation, especially as reporters, discussing the questions we have and discussing the things that we don't know can be kind of important in a way that you can't really do that with an article. You can't really type out an article saying, here's a list of all the things we don't know. We're not going to give you any information. But in a conversational format, I think you can discuss those questions and those unknowns in a little bit more of an effective way. And, like I said, COVID's an example. I think elections are examples. If you're covering something like municipal issues, a big city council issue, a lot of podcasters will call it their emergency episode, but I think it allows you to really kind of take advantage of those quote unquote emergencies a lot better than maybe any other publishing form.
There's something so soothing about the bugs in the background, Ben, when your mic is on. It's great.
I apologize. I'm like in the middle of the Arkansas forest and there's a nephew birthday party going on inside. So this is the fewer distractions are out here on the deck. So I apologize.
No, I don't know about anyone else, but it's putting me quite at ease. So thank you.
It's great ambiance. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with all the hardest and best parts that everyone has said so far. I know one thing for us that just as we've been doing this podcast now for, gosh, I guess 10 months or so, and we have a structured bit in that we're going to come on here, we're going to talk to reporters, and we're going to do, the stories that need more detailing, and that's kind of the overarching theme. And then every week at the beginning of the week, we have a conference call to plan out what that is going to be, and who this week is available for an interview, and are they going to know, now that we're not in the office together, how to get on to their computer and do the tech like we need them to, and remember to hit record on their audio, are they going to have extra interview clips that we can insert? Trying to plan all of that out in a week can be a lot, and so that's kind of been a difficult thing to do as we're far apart. But I agree with the connection that you can have and the deeper conversations. It would take a lot more time probably for somebody to read a transcription of everything that has been said in this panel, but people talk pretty fast. And so I think you can get a lot more in depth. You can learn a lot more. You can have a deeper connections with folks. And when you or others can sit back and listen to the final project, the final product that you've created, and you get that feeling of whatever the topic is, whether it was just enjoyment that you were getting out of it, or you're looking for new information, and it really clicked for you because you felt like you were immersed in what these people were talking about. That's a really great feeling. And so it's cool to experience that, and it's cool to be able to provide that for other people. And so those are the best and worst parts for me. Yeah, and I second, again, all the advice that everyone has said. When it comes to marketing, if that's something you're interested in, but you don't have that formal training, one question that I would offer that you ask yourself, if that's something you kind of want to dabble in, is just who is your target audience? Who do you want to listen to your podcast? Who wants to listen to your podcast? And brainstorm where those people are. One thing that has been huge that I've recognized during the pandemic, just in terms of reporting, there is a Facebook group for everything. There's a Facebook group out there, and they want you to drop a link to your podcast in their page every week, and their 50 members will click on it whenever they can, and they'll listen to it. Whenever, let's say you're going to write like an Instagram post or send a tweet or something. I mean, think about the buzzwords that if whoever your target audience is might be searching when they're on a 3-hour drive and they're ready for something to listen to. So just keep that in mind when you're at that stage. If something you want to be thinking about, who wants to listen to this and how do I get to them? Where are they on the internet and what words are they looking up and what excites them? And that can be helpful for you to get your media out. And then, yeah, I would think too, just as like a last bit of advice about not every podcast has to be something that you do every week, every 2 weeks. I mean, you could do a short series. If there's something really interesting to you and you just want to do like 4 episodes, boom, here's that package. People like that too. So really, it's very flexible in terms of being a medium, and you can kind of make it whatever you want it to be.
Those short series podcasts are great. I've had a few that I've listened to that I've thoroughly enjoyed. But I would say, please don't search for podcasts while you're driving. Not safe. So let's.
Yeah, the passenger is doing the searching. Hopefully.
Yes, please.
I think Kayla brings up a good point though, because there's a lot about podcasting that you don't consider. Like when you're writing up the episode information, you are putting keywords in so that people can find an episode. So even if someone's looking for something very specific, like if I were like, I don't know a lot about Bria Clark, I'm going to plug her name in. If that's in Zach's keywords, then it's going to pop up in my Apple Podcast app. And so like search engine optimization and making sure that you have a website and you have social media presence and all these things are very like things like Charlie with his wall of, strings going everywhere from Always Sunny. But it's small things like that can bump your listenership very easily, and just thinking practically about things like that.
I want to throw a quick note in about marketing is to underscore something JP said. It always causes me anxiety to post multiple times about an episode, but that's exactly what you should be doing. I think we start to think, oh, we're bugging people, but if you put a billboard up on I-35, you don't hope somebody drives by it once. You want them to drive by it every day. And on social media, the only way they're going to drive by it every day is if you post it every day or 2 times a day. So don't only not be afraid to do it. Understand that, like JP said, when you do it, your numbers go up. That's what you need to be doing if you want people to see your post, because there's once it scrolls past it, you don't see it again.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say too, I'm the same way. Just personally in my usage of social media, I don't like to post very often. But one way that can help if you've recorded this episode and it's your episode for the next week and you just want to get all those posts done. I mean, there are ways to roll those out. I mean, there's an app. If you're on Twitter, you can use TweetDeck and schedule things out, and you can kind of see and plan and just sit down and knock them all out at once. Not have to worry about it. And the tweets will just send, and you can do the same thing on other platforms in terms of scheduling, and that can be kind of helpful if you just don't want to have to worry about it every single day. Schedule them out and it's done.
Yeah, I just want to drop some advice for marketing. Like podcasts are pretty hard to market, since it's not like a super clickable thing that you can just come and go. You're kind of roped into listening to something that's probably like 30 minutes long. But I mean, a few tricks have been like, you definitely want to grab people early if they do end up clicking. So a lot of different shows, if they have like something that's a super interesting quote, they'll just bump it at the top of the show. And that's just kind of like building expectation, like, yeah, you'll hear something like this if you just keep listening. And even doing that, like in the title of the show, or when you blast it out on social media, just like somehow sharing like just what the content of the show will be, or really nice pullable quotes are really good.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's at least one show that I listen to that they will pull parts from interviews out and put that in their intro to give you an idea of what's to come. And if you like what you hear, then you're going to be more likely to stick around for the rest of the show. These are all great pieces of advice. Any other thoughts we have before we move on to the next section?
I guess I would just say that like the best part, and also a good reason to start podcasting, is it just gives you a good like reason to contact people and ask them for a conversation. I feel like other journalists probably like benefit that just like as a daily part of their job and stuff. But if you're just like a normal like person, like it's kind of hard to just reach out to a stranger and be like, hey, I think you're interesting, let's talk. But I think having a podcast somehow lowers people's barriers for that.
Yeah, just
sorry. No, go ahead. Who was
I was just going to say, I think in any kind of creative medium, especially in podcasting, which is kind of so close to journalism, leading with curiosity is definitely definitely more effective than ambition. So if you're a curious person and you're kind of always reading something, watching something, engaging in something outside of podcasting, I think that'll go a really long way for you.
Okay, I'm so glad you said that, because that's great advice. That's awesome. You guys are so great to share all this expertise and everything. I do want to take like a few minutes for listeners that or attendees, listeners and attendees, to be able to chat in some questions to you guys. So if any of you guys who are attending have any questions that haven't been answered, go ahead and stick those in the chat right now, and then we can see if our people can answer them tonight. I'm trying to see if there are any that had been asked earlier. It looks like Christopher Perry had asked about other options for distribution besides Captivate, and it looks like people kind of answered that. Christopher, do you feel like people answered that for you okay?
There we go. I was trying to get off of my mute, but yes, I do. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions that are in the crowd? Christopher Perry has his own podcast. It looks like it is a college club hockey podcast. That's really cool. I listen to a couple soccer podcasts, so I think that sounds very interesting. It's called the WCHL podcast for those that are interested in hockey, maybe. While we're waiting for questions, Dave, do you want to talk about the maybe possibility of what PLS is thinking about doing, possibly?
Sure. We've been toying with the idea, kind of kicking it around about starting a Pioneer Library System podcast. And one, we were just interested to know if folks would find that as something engaging or something that they would want to listen to. And two, what kind of things you would want to hear from your local library system in a podcast form. And things we've been thinking about were interviews with authors or folks that work in the library, little get to know you pieces, maybe even getting on some local politicians that are from our coverage area, so on and so forth.
That sounds like something I would listen to. That would be cool. The author interviews in particular. And I also wonder, like, just sporadically whenever the case may be, if there are, patrons that have come to the library and they come every week, like, who is that person? And did you know, like, there's someone in your community that has come to the library every day for a year, whatever it is, interesting patrons would be something I'd be curious about just as a community member for something like that.
Kat, I wanted to answer your question. I don't believe the recording studio at Norman Central is currently open to the public. I think that counts as a meeting space right now, and those are not open for reservation. But I would keep an eye on our website, and when that phase happens, I'm sure that would be something that you would be able to book.
We just had a question. How many hours per week do people spend on their podcasts? So maybe from like the researching to the writing the script to creating it to editing it. How, if you were to make that into like 1 week, how many hours would you have spent typically on something like that?
For me, it depends, but it's typically around 4 or 5.
I would say at least 3, and that would be like bare bones minimum. And something we didn't get into too many specifics, but something that you might consider is reviewing your analytics and seeing how long people actually listen to your podcast for. So if they only listen to 30 minutes and they bail, then maybe your podcast should only be 30 minutes instead of being a full hour. And that's something that we had to reconsider in our most recent season, was that an hour was too long. Even though we thought that was pretty standard for podcasting, you might have to consider that. So things like that can, shorten the time you spend, but I think minimum 3 hours, probably more than that, depending on, we have a pretty good variable of people involved here, but I don't do outside interviews. I don't have to formulate a script for my podcast. So if I'm talking about something I kind of know about and I just need to refresh my information, then yeah, probably 3 hours, if not more.
Since mine comes from like a radio station, I don't know. I guess I'll just put the hours out there and it'll like just show you what is, I guess, expected. I think I do about 15 hours a week, and then it comes out every 2 weeks. So it's about like 30 hours like per episode. But yeah, I guess I just want to bounce off what Courtney said. We have certain analytics that I've looked at with just like, what she had said, kind of how far they've listened through an episode, but also how that kind of compares to the rest of the NPR shows. And kind of just like a rule of thumb has been, the longer an episode has gone, like say it's a 60-minute like podcast, the average listener across like everything will probably listen to about like halfway to 45 minutes of it. And that gap like closes more as you like bring it down to like 20 minutes. So like if it's a 20-minute episode, people are more likely to like listen through all of it, like about 60 or 70% of the way through they'll listen through. But yeah, I'm also getting paid to do like that 15 hours a week per podcast thing. So like if that's not feasible, don't do that. Don't like, kill yourself over this.
I think I dedicate a good, I think 6 hours maybe to an episode, depending on the episode. There are some episodes, sometimes we do like a series where, like we have this one series called Music Mayhem where each of us selects an album and we have to listen to it. We have a week to listen to it. If I'm doing that kind of episode, it's definitely more than 6 hours because I'm listening to an album over and over and over again and writing notes and doing tons of research. But for like a typical episode, I would say 6 hours, and that includes, the researching, the actual recording, and then going through the editing, and also just like posting everything online and stuff. Like that actually takes a good amount of time for me because I have a slow computer. So
I know we've gone just a tiny bit over, so I'm gonna ask one more question that someone chatted, and it says, if there is one, was there a show that you listened to that made you realize you could do a podcast?
So a lot of the podcasts I like are very personality based, I think. And it's a lot of like friends talking to each other, you know, and I think that is what makes podcasting feel approachable to me. And the way that I do my podcasting is that you think, oh, well, I can have a funny conversation about something with a friend of mine, and that will easily translate into a podcast. But I think what I didn't realize was just the millions of podcasts that are already out there doing probably close to the exact same thing that I'm doing. I mean, true crime podcasting is very popular at this point, and we started 2 years ago. So I am like somewhat jealous of JP, who has this like very niche, you know, like he has people listening, you know, exactly for the reason that he wants them to be listening. And so it's not just one-off episodes that you might be interested in. And so it is super fun. And I truly do encourage everybody to do it, because it is fun to do. Like Kayla said, it's something I enjoy doing. I've surprised myself at how much I like doing it. And so I think most podcasts seem really easy to do, if that makes sense. Like it just seems very, conversational, and we'll just record ourselves and it'll be so easy. But and there are some obstacles to overcome, but I think that's what makes them seem so approachable in that way.
Yeah, for me, I was a podcast fiend for a very long time, because I was working nights for a company and they let us listen to music. And so I opted to listen to podcasts, and I would just listen to podcasts for like 8 hours straight. And my friends kind of knew that about me, and that's sort of why they were able to kind of come up with their own idea for a podcast, because I was always talking to them about the podcasts I was listening to. And so that kind of got their creative juices flowing, and they actually pitched it to me. And the reason why I kind of like the idea of doing a podcast, even though I never imagined that I would ever like do a podcast, is because I listened to my all-time favorite podcast was a podcast called Harmontown, which was hosted by Dan Harmon, who created Community and is one of the minds behind Rick and Morty. And his podcast was like, I mean, I think I love that podcast more than I love any movie or TV show, just because it was very funny and very honest. And it was just, he wasn't trying to make a good podcast. He was just trying to be funny. And he was just being like very open, almost like a little too open sometimes. But what had it all going is that he had a friend, Jeff Davis, who's an improviser for Whose Line Is It Anyway? Kind of his role was to kind of like probe him and to get him to keep talking and ask him questions. And I saw that as like a role I could take with my friends. And so yeah, that's the podcast that kind of got me inspired in that sort of role that Jeff Davis took on Harmontown that I ended up doing. But the way it kind of turned out is all three of us kind of have a voice. I'm not just the prodder anymore. I call myself the moderator, but it's mostly because of behind the scenes stuff. So.
Yeah, there were two shows that I really liked, and they were extremely popular. They're NPR shows. I listened to the first Serial podcast, and then I listened to S-Town. If you haven't, you really should. They're very good. And that's obviously gold standard. I mean, just incredible investigative reporting, very well produced. And I had never heard anything like that before, especially with S-Town. And the storyline there, I'm not going to give anything away, but the storyline there was just, it was quirky and it kept me really engaged. And you could tell that this person that hosts the podcast was invested himself, and so I felt more invested, and again, just that immersion. And so those were the two that made me want to do a podcast on my own, just because of the experience that I had had listening to that. And then when I kind of like what has been said previously on this, I started doing some research, started Googling, you know, how does one even go out making a podcast, and then realizing a lot of people are doing this and there are a lot of how-tos, and mine maybe won't be, you know, this great, but I can take the lessons that I learned from that and implement them and figure out how to do it. And so I think it's gone well, but those are the two shows that really got me excited.
I think I'm the last person. So I don't know if there was like a specific show. I would just listen to NPR like during my commute all the time. And then I kind of transitioned into doing student radio at college, and then participating at like the local NPR station, KGOU, over there. And then that kind of just like kept going and snowballed into other things. But I mean, the gold standard for like NPR radio shows is definitely like, you know, This American Life, which spawned off like Serial and S-Town, and like so many shows have like basically have been doing like the This American Life thing. So I guess if there's another show that I would just want to plug, Heavyweight is coming out soon, season I think 3. It's a really great show, and I was never like the journalisty fact-finding kind of person, but This American Life and Jonathan Goldstein had plenty of stories that were just kind of like, hey, there was this voicemail that everyone in college like got. Let's figure out what that voicemail was. So.
Awesome. Huge thank you to all of our panelists who came out tonight. This was wonderful. Your insight and your experience were just great in bringing the whole world of podcasting out to us, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and if you're listening later on the downloads, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Make sure you head over to pioneerlibrarysystem.org to check out all of the great things we have going on, our digital programming, things we have happening in our branches, which are semi-open, or mostly open, I should say. Definitely come in, get some stuff, say hi, and you can follow us on social media. We're all over the place. Just search Pioneer Library System. Please give us a like, and we appreciate your time. Hope everyone has a great night, and take care, everybody.